Great. I want to welcome people to the Climate Investment Fund's Transformational Change Learning Partnership webinar. We're really excited for today's webinar. My name's Tim Larson with Ross Strategic. I'm one of the facilitators for the Transformational Change Learning Partnership. And looks like we've got quite a few people still continuing to join, but I'm inclined to just begin to get started because we have a lot that we're hoping to cover today. Next slide, Anna. Today's webinar is focusing on working with companies and catalyzing transformation and value chains, featuring the work of the Earthworm Foundation with some special focus on their work in Indonesia. We think that this is really exciting for an area that a lot of institutions working on development, thinking about creative ways to engage the private sector in really transforming landscapes, climate action, sustainable development. So we're really thrilled to have this opportunity today to hear from and learn from the work that the Earthworm Foundation is doing, and to also hear from company perspectives on why and how they're engaging in this type of work. Next slide, please. We're going to start off the webinar hearing from Anna Williams, the director of the Transformational Change Learning Partnership at the Climate Investment Funds, to just hear a little bit of context about the ways that the CIF has been working to support transformational change and advance it in the context of work on landscapes, which I think will help set a foundation. And then we'll turn and hear from two representatives from the Earthworm Foundation about their work in catalyzing transformation and value chains, and then move into a panel reflection session where we'll actually hear from a company representative from the Hershey Company, as well as some other Earthworm staff who are working directly with companies in landscapes in Indonesia. And then we'll have a chance to hear from all of you with questions and discussion option items that you have as well, and then move to wrap up. Please keep your line muted while not speaking, just to avoid background noise, and we will be recording this webinar for others to watch later. It will be posted on the CIF website. With that, I'd like to turn it over and introduce Anna Williams, who's been is the director of the Transformational Change Learning Partnership at the Climate Investment Funds, and has been working to advance the CIF's work on transformational change over the past several years. Anna, over to you.
Thank you, Tim, and welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We're happy to have this group collected today to learn from over 2 decades of experience working with private companies to improve commodity value chains. This has a large footprint and impact on natural systems and human systems across different categories of value, from natural ecosystems all the way through to commodities, transport, and everything in between. Often the work that we do through the climate investment funds and other climate finance institutions doesn't get at this angle of activity or engagement with the private sector, but there's a broad recognition of the importance of this type of work, and a curiosity, and I'd say also a sense of urgency around how to do it and to do it effectively. And that is why we invited the speakers from the Earthworm Foundation and our panelists today to help describe the work that they've done and some lessons from it that might be of relevance to others, whether they're working within landscape context or other contexts or sectors. This is part of a series of the Transformational Change Learning Partnership this year, where about once a month we've been having people come and share about different topics, work that they're doing, and these tend to be themes that are relevant to long-term change and transformational change, the way that we've been conceptualizing it and trying to achieve more with that objective in mind. I think I'll just give a brief overview of the Climate Investment Funds for those who are not familiar, and then we'll turn to our speakers in just a couple of minutes with that context first. So for those of you who are not familiar with the CIF, CIF, or the Climate Investment Funds, established in 2008, has been for over a decade one of the largest global climate finance institutions in the world, with over $8 billion of funding from 14 countries, run through 4 programs that focus on clean energy, access to energy in low-income countries, and clean energy in low and middle-income countries, resilience, and forests. The Forest Investment Program is one of the smaller programs, but it is small and mighty, as we will learn a bit more about. The CIF is implemented through multilateral development bank partners listed at the bottom of the screen and is active in over 70 countries around the world. The Forest Investment Program is a program of over $600 million US, active in over 20 countries listed on this screen. And again, this FIP, or the Forest Investment Program, FIP, is also implemented through partnership with the multilateral development banks. And today's context in Indonesia, the Forest Investment Program works through both the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank. There is more information on the websites listed on the screen if you're interested in learning more. In addition to the Forest Investment Program, CIF has a dedicated grant mechanism for Indigenous people and local communities, also known as the DGM. The DGM is a direct, like it sounds, a direct granting mechanism to communities that have not often had access to funding or certain kinds of capacity building or opportunities for global learning and partnership in this space. And Indonesia is one of several countries involved in the DGM, so I thought that would be worth mentioning as well. It's pretty innovative and exciting, the work that is happening through the DGM. So if you'd like to learn more, there are 2 links on the screen, and you're welcome to learn more. And then lastly, the Transformational Change Learning Partnership, for those who are not familiar with it, began in 2017, and it started off with just trying to learn about what transformational change is. You know, what does the concept mean? Is it, and how would you know if it has happened or is on the way to happening? How can you design for programs and projects to be more transformational? And these are the questions that we have been wrestling with since then and have come a fair way in terms of understanding not only what this means, but also CIF's role over the past 10+ years in advancing transformational change. We're not going to go into that today, but there were some studies conducted in 2017 and 2018 that provided some lessons. And since then, we've been continuing to advance the sort of common knowledge and understanding through a set of case studies and advancing now the frameworks that we use to understand transformational change. This year, we also have 4 interest groups, including one on landscapes, forests, and agriculture. And we're pleased to have those of you who are interested to join one of these interest groups to please contact us, contact Regan or me. And you're welcome to join as we get into these topics more deeply, including one interest group on advancing the concepts, methods, and metrics, including signals of transformational change. In landscapes, we've learned a lot. We've learned how hard this work is and how multidimensional, you know, from human, natural, and social systems perspectives, and also how vulnerable the advancements are to change or reversal at any time. We know this is long-term work and it takes commitment from many parties at many levels. So it's with deep respect for this work that we're, you know, learning from those who've been sort of in the trenches, so to speak, for a while. And with that, okay, sorry about that. Direction. I'm going to now pass it over to, there, I think we are one, okay. There we go. I'm going to introduce our speakers. We also have 2 panelists. So we have 2 speakers from the Earthworm Foundation, and then 2 panelists who will be reflecting upon what the speakers are sharing with us following their presentation. We're really pleased to have both Robin Barr and Stephen Patriarca with the Earthworm Foundation here with us today. Robin is the head of the US and Canada offices for the Earthworm Foundation, and she's also the director of the global program for the Center of Social Excellence, I guess technically the global program lead, and she'll be explaining a bit about that work with us. She brings over 15 years of experience working with private companies to both procure responsibly produced materials and to achieve corporate sustainability goals. Steve is the head of programs and innovations based in Earthworm's Jakarta office, which is the largest office that Earthworm has in over 15 countries. And he's an experienced business executive and advisor focused on driving innovations in global supply chains and the rural economy. I'm going to briefly just introduce the panelists who will be joining after Robin and Steve finish, and then they'll have a chance to also introduce themselves a bit more at that time. Fareza Hidayat is the operations lead in Earthworm Foundation's Indonesia office, where he supports corporate engagements with the largest commodity producers in Indonesia. And last but not least, we are pleased to have Molly Harrigan from the Hershey Company. Molly is a senior sustainability analyst for responsible sourcing at the Hershey Company. She's worked at the Hershey Company for 2 years, first on the global sustainability team, and for the last year on the global responsible sourcing team, where she manages Hershey's responsible palm oil sourcing program, as well as their tier 1 supplier social compliance program. We're delighted to have Molly here today. I will mention also that Nasibe Chimor, who is the lead facilitator for the TCLP's Landscape Interest Group, is on today as well. Many of you may know her from her work in Mexico. She worked for 10 years on implementing programs through the CIF and others while she was with CONAFOR, which is the Mexican Forest Authority. And we're very, very happy to have Nasibe on our team and to learn from her as well. With that, I'm going to pass the baton over to Robin and Steve. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna. Organize things here a little bit. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Well, I just wanted to start out by saying a huge thank you to Anna, Tim, Regan, Nasibe, Irene, everyone at TCLP, both for inviting us to be part of these conversations and to learn from the really rich experience that everyone has brought to it, as well as giving us the gift of being able to present and share more about our work today with everyone. I know that so many people on this call have really rich experience in working on these issues. And so I'm very humbled to be able to present to you today. And I'm really looking forward to your insights and your feedback. And I hope that this can be one of many conversations to come. So I wanted to start by giving you an idea of the kinds of issues that we work to address in Earthworm Foundation. So we're very focused on some of the most pressing issues that we see right now in the world, issues of climate change, issues of deforestation, destruction of natural ecosystems, as well as social issues related to exploitive labor practices, community conflicts, and farmer resilience. And at Earthworm Foundation, our focus is on addressing the way that global supply chains create products. We believe that many of the products we consume represent our biggest impact on the planet and on people. And we can transform the way that they are made so that it becomes one that respects and rejuvenates people and nature, as opposed to depleting or exploiting. So just to give you a quick overview of who we are, we're a nonprofit organization. We were founded in 1999. We work across 5 continents. We have offices in 17 different countries. We work with over 100 companies, and we bring together an expertise on both social and environmental issues, as well as business issues, and just a wide range of expertise to help tackle so many of the challenges that we see in global supply chains. We're a membership organization, and our members are companies who make commitments to work on transforming the practices in their supply chains and to work with us on a journey of improvement and innovation. So this is a list of our members. Many of them may be household names like 3M and Nestle and Mars, Ferrero. Others may be companies you haven't heard of because they're at different places in the supply chain. But we're really pleased that companies from all roles in the supply chain, as well as many different countries around the world, have decided to take this journey of responsible sourcing with us. So over the 20 years that we've been doing this, we've developed a sort of framework that we found can actually be applied to many different commodity supply chains. And we call it the VTTV framework. So that stands for values, transparency, transformation, and verification. So on the values side, we work with companies to help them understand the key environmental and social issues in their supply chain, and then to help them define what they want their policy to be as it relates to those issues. And we really work with them to develop pragmatic guidelines and guidance that their suppliers can use to meet the policy. On the transparency side, we help companies to map their supply chain back to the source. And then we also help them to assess what are the current practices that are common throughout the supply chain, and where are the places that are in need of engagement and transformation. And that brings us to the second T, transformation. This is the work that's really at the heart of so much of what we do, because this is the work where we seek to take those practices, take those production methodologies that may be currently causing harm, and find ways to change them so that they're actually healing and helping to rejuvenate people and nature. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we do that in just a minute. And then the final V is verification. So how do we verify that changes have been made? How do we measure and monitor those changes over time? It's grappling with these questions that's also made us so happy to be able to engage with the TCLP and to learn from the rich experiences that those who have been operating as part of CIF have been sharing with us. So when we work with companies and global value chains, it's really important to understand the different roles that different companies play in a supply chain. So I thought I would sort of break this down for you in the way that we think about it. At the downstream end of a supply chain are brands, retailers, consumer goods companies. These are usually household names who are selling products in a grocery store or own the grocery store. They're selling to thousands, if not millions, of consumers, and they're very concerned that their brand represents the values that that public and that consumer base has. But there are also many nodes or many supply chain levels removed from what's actually happening on the ground where their products are created. So brands and retailers are usually buying from what we call traders and processors. These are the companies that help get commodities from one region of the world to another region of the world and help to process them from their raw or semi-raw form into ingredients that are commonly used. Ingredients or, for example, pulp and paper that are commonly used in the products that we consume. The traders are the ones who have a relationship with the producers. And the producers are those companies that have a land footprint and are really in the field. So they may be managing large farms, large plantations, forest concessions, etc. They're usually hiring thousands of people to work. And they're the ones who are really in the landscapes that we're working with and who we engage with very closely on these questions of transformation. And then it's also worth noting that producers, in addition to managing their own large operations, are often buying from smallholder farmers as well. And this relationship may be through middlemen or through cooperatives, but we found that for many of the commodities that we've mapped, the volume coming from farmers can be anywhere from 40 to 90%. So, and if you want to engage with those farmers, it's good to go through the producers. So each of these stages can indicate who you would need to work with to be introduced to the next level of the supply chain. And we really think about this as a system. We see commodity value chains as global systems that are driving incentives around land use decisions and human rights. And our objective is to help make these value chains fully transparent and to create transformation where and when it's needed. This is just a handful of the value chains that we work on. We're probably best known for our work on palm oil or pulp and paper or cacao, but we actually work on many different value chains. And we found that this approach does tend to work with just about any commodity value chain that we've tackled. And then I thought I would just go a little bit into more detail on how we tend to approach the transformation work. You know, so many of these challenges like climate change, biodiversity loss, deforestation, etc., are really complicated, sometimes widespread in a given region. And they can be very overwhelming to think about how to solve them. So what we try to do is we really try to approach them with an open mind. We try to go in without any preconceived notions about what's happening or whose fault it is or what the solution should be. And we try to just learn from local people how they understand that problem. We'll seek a kind of typical situation where local actors are willing to work with us on testing out or looking for solutions. And then we'll embed teams in that region, you know, boots on the ground, to begin to seek a solution to some of those problems. As we do that, we really try to help all of the stakeholders who play a role in developing a solution to come together to get a shared understanding of the problem and to actually begin to collaborate and co-create with us what those possible solutions could look like. And then there's a whole process of trial and error. You know, usually the first idea is not the one that works. So there's a lot of adaptation and negotiation and revisions that take place with the goal of finding a solution that many different local actors, especially ones who may not usually agree with each other, can get behind. And then once we have been able to develop that solution, we've often found that it can scale very, very quickly. Part of this is thanks to our members and those supply chain systems. Our members are able to share the solutions that are developed with all of their suppliers. And it really makes a difference if a supplier hears from a customer about a solution that could be relevant to them. Additionally, we found that companies are very savvy. They're paying close attention to what their peers are doing, to what their competitors are doing. They don't want to fall behind. And so many of them will make the effort to reach out to the peer and learn directly through that peer-to-peer learning how to implement a certain solution. We also try to create videos, create documents, share it through the media, share it with the financial community, with institutions, with global NGOs, et cetera, so that more information can be shared about the solution that has been developed. And then we've seen that this can spark a chain reaction where a well thought through solution can multiply very quickly. So that's a very high level introduction to how we work. And I'd like to invite my colleague, Stephen, to talk you through a really grounded example of one place that we've been working in Indonesia. So over to you, Steve.
Great, thank you, Robin. And hello, everybody. Can everyone hear me clearly? Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, great. So the connection isn't too strong here in Jakarta, so I wanted to say hello on video. I am a real person, but I will switch over to just audio just to make sure we can hear each other all right. Okay. So thank you, Robin, and hello, everybody again. I want to say, obviously, company supply chains reach into some of the most far-flung locations around the globe, but there are particular ones, we use the term landscape here, that are, of course, of outsized importance to business and to society relative to others. When we're assessing the relative importance of areas, we're looking at a few attributes. The first is the strength of connection to supply chains. Quite simply, the stronger, the better, both in terms of making a business case to companies, but also in terms of having commercial leverage to eventually drive transformation, as Robin was speaking about. The second thing we're looking at is environmental attributes. Could be something like biodiversity or key forest areas or importance for things like climate action. And then last, we are looking at human development parameters such as livelihood conditions, conditions for workers, and respect for human rights. Now, before honing in on our single case study, I do want to just quickly show you our map of global landscapes here. We have over a dozen of them. Each of these have been selected for a combination of the unique attributes. In short, I will say these are really unique places where, for our part, we're trying to identify and drive practical solutions that can be scaled up through cross-sector collaboration, obviously using the private sector as an entry point. And the solutions we're trying to hit on here are both to mitigate the negative impacts from production, unsustainable production that's happening right now, as well as to work on the more long-term work of seizing the considerable opportunities and positive impacts to having more responsible production and development practices, wider development practices. Now, turning our attention to our landscapes program in Aceh, Tamiang, in Indonesia, the ultimate vision of this program, which has been running since 2016, is really to show to local and global stakeholders alike that it is indeed possible to have vibrant commodity production and inclusive economic growth at scale and in a way that needn't come at the expense of these sensitive forest areas, nor through cutting corners on things like workers' rights, or for that matter, human rights as well. By its design, I will say the program itself is very holistic in nature. We're using supply chains and private sector leverage to address a whole host of interconnected issues in the landscape, and then to work with local institutions to improve them. This connects directly to about 11 of the SDGs, which I'm sure a number of you on the call are quite familiar with and may even track within your own organizations or institutions. I'll return to this at the end, the very end, when I summarize our impacts thus far. But just starting with the basics, first of all, where is it? Well, it's in the northernmost tip of Sumatra here in Indonesia, just across the Malaccan Strait from Singapore, as well as Kuala Lumpur. And in terms of the big commodity supply chains that are prevalent in the landscape, as in much of Indonesia, palm oil does reign supreme, though we do see a good amount of rubber production as well. But more importantly, why Aceh? In addition to those linkages to global supply chains, which are quite strong, Aceh is also home to the famous and quite threatened looser ecosystem shown on your screen in green. This is the third largest rainforest in the world, just behind the Amazon and the Congo. And it's one of the most biologically abundant places known to mankind. Importantly, on the climate front, its peatlands act as one of the largest carbon sinks in the world, so it plays a key role in the fight against climate change. And millions of local people that live there do rely on it for ecosystem services like clean water, protection from flooding and drought, just to name a few. Lastly, I will say it remains one of the poorest regions in all of Indonesia, with smallholder farmers being especially vulnerable. So whether it's for biodiversity or carbon or livelihoods, it makes a great deal of sense to focus in this region. The importance of this hasn't been lost on the scientific community nor on campaigning NGOs, the latter of which I will say have been especially effective at raising global attention as of late on the importance of the looser ecosystem, as well as the persistent pressures that it continues to face, particularly from global supply chains such as palm oil, as well as timber and pulp and paper. As you can imagine, this in turn is putting a lot of pressure on companies, including but not limited to palm oil companies, to respond and essentially demonstrate that they're sourcing from or producing in this region responsibly. But as I said, it's a very vast area, and with so many companies operating, so many competing interests at play, it begs the question, how do you actually start to affect change, let alone scale it, particularly when there's issues of trust, lack of consensus, these sorts of things Robin discussed. We've found in our experience the absolute best way to do it, one of them, quite simply, is to start with maps. In our experience, nothing seems to facilitate discussions better and move stakeholders from sort of an esoteric discussion to a practical and focused one than maps. And we did use a number of the maps I'm about to show you here internally, just to figure out what was going on in this region, as well as externally to start conversations with local stakeholders, not only to build that understanding, but to eventually generate consensus to act on some of the challenges we found there. Now, I'd like to focus your attention here on the maps of the Aceh Tamiang landscape that I'll cycle through on the right-hand side of your screen. So we see in 1990, back in 1990, if anyone remembers that year, the forest coverage shown in green in the landscape was quite large, just about 70%. And that yellow jagged line you see running north to south, that's the boundary of the looser ecosystem. And the red icons, those represent palm oil mills that are sourcing and processing raw materials from all throughout the region. Now, by 2000, the forest areas have already decreased considerably. And if we advance all the way to a more recent year, 2016, it decreases even further, including well beyond that boundary of the looser ecosystem. Now, as we showed local stakeholders, if we train the satellites to determine what this clearance was for, we see that the vast majority, shown in yellow here now on your screen, was converted to palm oil plantations, very clearly, both industrial as well as smallholder type farms. Now, fortunately, we could determine the location of virtually all companies operating in the district. I'll show you that here. And by putting the remaining forest back into these company areas, we can start to see the location of plantations and mills and forests in relation to one another. And this really helps us, as well as the company we work with, to identify risk. But if we really want to focus stakeholders' attention, I would say we ask the question, where is there still forest, particularly inside company license areas? And we see right away there's a small number of plantations where considerable forest remains. So suddenly, in just a matter of a few maps with local stakeholders, we've gone from this quite theoretical discussion on a landscape to pretty clear next steps in terms of specific actors to engage down on the ground, and which among them these companies might need direct support or encouragement to improve their land use planning and to either make or adhere to sustainability commitments. But of course, I will say it's not only these large-scale industrial actors. We do see here in orange on your screen, this is the plantation areas belonging to companies. But in yellow, outside of all those areas, we do see areas belonging to smallholder farmers. And relative to companies, they of course need even more support to produce responsibly and better benefit from that. Now, last but not least, in what I promise is the most complicated map I'll show you, we see the spatial plan of the local government at the time we started. And this is overlaid with deforestation alerts, all those red and yellow spots you see. Now, the large pale yellow area in the center is zoned specifically for agriculture. And although some areas within the LUCER were legally zoned for agriculture, we can see many spots of deforestation beyond that yellow boundary. And that was actually in violation of a moratorium the government had on forest clearance at that time. And in the upper northwest, we can see many spots of deforestation on the orange area, which is zoned for specifically for forestry, but which we confirmed was actually smallholder clearance for oil palm. Now, both of these activities are unfortunately illegal, and it was this very map that you see on the screen right now, which we used to persuade the government to work with us to support them to address these and other related risks and issues in the landscape. Now, I will say, it's one thing to see dots on the map and categorize it as risk. And while that may well be true, there are, of course, human stories behind each and every one of these GPS points. So, having the support of the government, having that private sector leverage, it's essential. It gives us legitimacy and influence in the landscape. But we did make sure to spend the better part of a year and a half using that data to get down on the ground and meet with all manner of local stakeholders, including very many who I think it's fair to say have not been afforded very many opportunities to participate in decision-making processes that could affect their lives or their businesses. So we did use this process of engagement, which is ongoing to the present day, not only to get a more granular understanding, but to form relationships and invite those stakeholders who, let's be clear here, the landscape belongs to them, really, to co-design the program interventions with us in a way that meets their needs. And that's really what we want, because it's ultimately them that we view as long-term partners and the ideal leaders to carry forward this work well into the future. And it was this coming together of the visual information, which we find to be so useful, and consultation that led to a shared plan. Specifically, an agreement to focus in that upper northwest area where we saw so much of that deforestation and support companies up there as well as forest frontier communities to implement more sustainable land use plans and to create replicable models of success there, not just one-offs that are quite difficult to achieve. And then to have a more wide landscape level lens to work with a range of stakeholders, especially the government, to address the drivers of deforestation in the region, and just as importantly, the common social and labor issues that are connected to commodity supply chains there. Today, we're well into implementation. We're starting to focus more on consolidating the collaboration at the landscape level just to ensure the long-term success and durability of the project. Before I share 5 key successes we've had, I'd like to say our general activities at this time do focus around, first, finding alternative and supplementary livelihood models for those communities on the forest frontier that reduce pressure on LUCER. The second thing is building the capacity of companies to improve their environmental and social performance. Excuse me. And last, really important, setting up monitoring systems with the local institution themselves, such as these satellite monitoring systems we've created, so that they have a continuous supply of data and insights that will enable them to really manage their lands themselves in the future. So the 5 key successes I'd like to share, first thing here is just a focus on the forest loss. We've seen just over a 60% drop in deforestation since the inception of the project. Now, this is no doubt due to a number of factors, but given how closely we have worked with the local government and companies in the region, one thing we're quite confident about is Their awareness has increased significantly on the importance of forest protection as a result of our program activities, and they've made formal commitments to them as well, which I'll expand on in just a moment. And we do think that that is really a significant part of the overall behavioral change we're seeing. Now, I will say it's not all positive news. The caveat I'd make here is that the forest that does continue to be lost, the majority, unfortunately, continues to take place within the looser ecosystem. So this is the reason why we know it's so important to continue the work in this region.
Stephen, this is Tim. I just want to let you know I've got about 2 minutes left, so probably need to speed up a little bit to wrap.
Thanks. Second thing, big win for us. We did establish a formal partnership with the local government to support them on land use planning, and this resulted in a moratorium being announced on the issuance of all new palm oil licenses in the district, as well as an evaluation of current existing licenses. Third, the trainings we've run with companies have catalyzed some quite encouraging developments. Last year, we brokered the largest forest protection agreement in the history of the district, and the scope actually extended into neighboring districts as well. So good spillover effect there. Fourth, something I know the team is really proud of is our work with some of the most vulnerable communities on the forest frontier. We're running a series of pilots here to increase their agricultural know-how, their livelihoods, their income, and we're already seeing strong indications of profitability there, as well as replication throughout the community. So we're really encouraged by that. Last but not least, in late last year, we did develop and agree on a roadmap with the government to address widespread labor issues in the landscape that's connected to commodity production. So that's something we're quite excited about. I will say those are just 5 of what are really several impacts we're seeing in the landscape work. I won't spend much time here, just other than to say, you know, given that we're working across the whole landscape, we do necessarily need to address a range of interconnected issues. You'll get a copy of these slides, so I did want to be sure to share some of the impacts beyond the 5 just highlighted. In terms of next steps, finally, we're very focused, I'll say, on continuing to build the capacity of local actors and partners to transition them to full uptake in leadership to drive forward and scale all of our program activities. I do believe smallholders and community support remains the single most important area to direct resources, so that's a big focus for us. And finally, as we well know, the palm oil sector is a dominant but not exclusive player up in Aceh. So to scale up, we'll be looking to engage with a number of other commodity sectors, including but not limited to cacao, coffee, and rubber. And we do plan to do that in a targeted fashion to address the pressures to the looser ecosystem, not only within Aceh, the landscape we've discussed today, but beyond it as well. And we believe that's the best way, I should say even the only way, to help ensure the long-term viability of this incredible ecosystem that continues to be an important sourcing region for many companies. So that's it for me, folks. Thank you very much for your attention. Before handing over, I would like to just give a special thank you as well to our supporters and partners, in particular our Landscape Coalition. They're the most significant contributors to and the active supporters of this work. So, including Hershey's, I will say. So I'm delighted they'll be joining us today. Thank you, everybody.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephen, and Robin for sharing that great summary of your work, including in Indonesia. Before we turn to the panel, I did want to just create space to see if you have some quick thoughts in response to one of the chat questions that came in from Ms. Chitembo Chunga from Zambia regarding how you're thinking about designing livelihood options into programs and initiatives and thinking about that longer term capacity building. So hopefully that'll come out more in the discussion later, but if you have any quick reflections on approaches to livelihood options, it would be great to share them.
Sure. Just very quickly, Tim. The two things that we have there is a real problem of land scarcity. So the communities that are there, they have little choice but to expand into the forest unless they're increasing their productivity on the limited existent land that they already have. So when we're thinking of designing livelihood interventions, it's how do we get the maximum productivity out of existent land, scarce land. The second thing is the region is undergoing a massive replanting effort where they're cutting down old plantations and putting up new ones. That's great for long-term success, but immediately it plunges these communities into a situation where they've lost a lot of income. So when we're thinking about designing something for those scenarios, it's how do we plant things on these new young plantations so that they're getting yield and income and food in that interim before these plantations actually mature. So that's where we're bringing in sort of the agricultural experts to design planting regimes that work to sort of buffer that period where they do lose income.
Great. Thanks so much. And I know there's some other questions coming in, and we'll pick those back up a little bit later in the discussion period. But now I'd like to turn to our panel. Once again, to reintroduce Molly Harrigan, Senior Sustainability Analyst for Responsible Sourcing at the Hershey Company, and also Fareza Hidayat with Earthworm Foundation. So thank you both for joining us, and we'd love to just kind of shift to kind of hearing your perspectives on some of the work in Indonesia more broadly around catalyzing transformation and value chains. And Molly, maybe if I could just start with you and hear a little bit about kind of why the Hershey Company is interested in engaging in this type of approach, and what's the value proposition to you in this kind of more holistic landscape level approach to supply chain intervention and management.
Sure. Hi, everyone. A pleasure to be here today. And just for quick context, Hershey has been a member of the Earthworm Foundation since 2014, and then really engaged in this Aceh landscape program since around 2016 when it started. And first and foremost, I'd say it'd be hard for Hershey on our own to do this transformation work without Earthworm. And it really all started with us first mapping our supply chain and understanding where our high-risk sourcing areas are. We identified Aceh, and then both because of internal company policies and goals, as well as some external pressures, we really understood the importance of engaging in this landscape program in Aceh. First, Steve alluded to this, Aceh has a lot of ecological importance in that it overlaps with the looser ecosystem. So it was important for Hershey to be a part of the conservation of remaining forests and peatlands, as well as restoring and recovering already cleared lands. This is an important carbon sink, and Hershey understands how important that is to fight the impacts of climate change. So this landscape program in the biggest sense allowed us to address those environmental challenges while also really supporting the livelihoods of the communities, the local communities there. And then specifically to Hershey, Steve noted, companies like Hershey faced a lot of campaigns and pressure from NGOs and activists around the land clearing that was and is happening in Aceh. And so this allows us to go beyond solely removing suppliers who violate our no deforestation, peat, and exploitation policy, but actually allows us to also engage and support the producers to take positive steps towards NDP action plans. And then just lastly, from Hershey's perspective, we are at the end of the supply chain and quite far from the source origin where a lot of this land clearing is happening. So we also recognize that consumers and investors increasingly want products that come from ethical and sustainable supply chains. And no company alone can really tackle these huge environmental and social challenges. So this landscape program with Earthworm, industry partners, civil society, and government really is the greatest combination for us in bringing together resources, expertise, and access that is necessary for this transformational change. So high level, those are some of the main reasons we were really interested in engaging in this landscape project.
Thanks, Molly. That's great. I think we'll dig more into some of those areas. I did want to turn to Fareza to see if you could just briefly describe your role at Earthworm Foundation in working with companies, and from the different companies beyond the Hershey company that you work with, any reflections you have on kind of the value proposition to this type of approach and work that you're hearing from other companies, why they get involved.
So thank you, Tim, and hi, everyone. I'm Fareza Hidayat, and I'm an operations lead with Earthworm Foundation Indonesia, driving our corporate engagement strategy with one of the largest producer companies in the palm oil, pulp and paper, and rubber sectors. So again, most of these new raw ingredients are consumed on a daily basis, and my role is to ensure that we're driving change in these companies to understand where their supply chain is coming from, identify which forests are valuable to conserve and protect because of the importance they have in these sourcing landscapes, and understand how communities are using these land use areas, whilst also driving stemming out the worst forms of child labor in the workforce. So that is my role, guiding these companies to understand these issues more deeply, and supporting them in meeting these commitments that they've made since 2010. I think what we've seen over the past decade or so is this evolution of why companies are engaging in landscapes and embedding sustainability practices in their supply chain. At first, when we were engaged with Nestle, a lot of it was driven from maintaining their reputation because there were NGO campaigns related to their KitKat products. So again, that touched on Nestle to engage with us to work to understand their supply chain, where those risks are coming from, and engage their suppliers directly in meeting their sustainability strategies. So again, when we look from a more customer-facing company, the main drivers is to maintain their reputation, because a lot of customers in these markets, especially in Europe and America, are quite concerned about these issues. But then when we talk to producer companies, which I'm quite heavily involved in, most of them want to maintain these relationships with these companies because they do command a better price than other markets in domestically or in Asia. So again, because of these relationships they have with multinational corporations in U.S. and America, they do need to fulfill these sustainability requirements and change their practices. Again, now the conversation has changed. Over the past 5 years, we've seen tremendous proactiveness from these producer companies to really embed sustainability as part of their operations. So we're seeing them being more proactive in accessing now financial products that are linked to sustainability performance, and that the transformation processes that they have embedded into their organization has rewarded them with accolades in recognition from Dow Jones Sustainability Index, and other recognition from the market. So again, there has been a change in the mindset for these producer companies to see it as a pain at first and a cost, but in the long run, eventually when they have more access to new customers as well as new financial packages that they can tie their sustainability performance to, it becomes more realistic for them to embed sustainability across their operations.
Great. Thanks, Fariza. Molly, you mentioned the Hershey company's been working with Earthworm Foundation since about 2014. And I'm curious, as you reflect back on that time, if there's any examples of kind of common implementation challenges that have emerged as the Hershey company with Earthworm has worked to embark on transforming supply chains and really, taking these new approaches. If there's anything that stands out at you as an example of the types of barriers or challenges that you've had to wrestle with.
Sure. Honestly, I would say really just knowing where we should start with some of these transformation programs. From Hershey's perspective, I will say we're a relatively small user of palm compared to some of our other commodities. So it's really this, but we understand the really oversized environmental and human rights risks related and linked to palm. So it's really this give and pull of, okay, where can we make sure we're making the biggest impact? What area within the palm supply chain is that? How are we making sure that it's really addressing the critical issues we're seeing linked to the supply chain, and then making sure that that is indeed where we are targeting our investments within our palm supply chain. So honestly, really just the beginning and understanding which transformation program we should be involved and engaged in sometimes is really where we face the biggest obstacle.
Great. And for Reza, you know, in the work that you've been doing with the Hershey Company and other companies, are there any common challenges or barriers, you know, from the, you know, day-to-day implementation of the programs and initiatives of transforming value chains that arises for you? As we think about transformational change, often it's around kind of overcoming barriers and challenges that can really enable changes in the system. And so it'd be great to just hear any reflections you have about some key ones that you all have had to wrestle with across your value chain work.
I think Robin had alluded to this in her presentation on the complexities in the supply chain. So understanding where your supply chain is coming from is really critical, because when you roll out a sustainability policy, you have to roll it out across your first-tier suppliers, and there's expectation to roll out those first-tier suppliers to their next level tier of suppliers. So again, when you go down the supply chain, you have thousands of stakeholders that you need to influence and move together, and their interests are all different. So you have a multinational corporation that's customer facing, that has a lot of pressure to implement their responsible palm oil policy. And then you have these tier one suppliers who are somewhat customer facing and need to secure the supply chains in the US and European market. So they are also more inclined to do something about it. But then once it gets rolled out into their dealers, their aggregators, which can be multiple levels, the translation can be lost. The interest can be quite hard to grasp, because you have a wide range of players within that supply chain that make it very difficult to move in the same direction. So you have large concessions that may have adequate resources to implement the very significant cost of changing their practices, and you have small, medium enterprises that are still growing. So the financial implications for those type of companies to adopt sustainability can be quite heavy, and they don't adopt it quite easily. And lastly, when we talk about smallholders, where their focus is on bringing food to the table, it's another conversation that you need to have with them, of ensuring that their livelihoods are met before any sustainability principles are embedded in their practices. So again, the complexity in the supply chain make it very challenging to implement, as well as the different jurisdictions we're operating in. In Indonesia, there are different districts that are more advanced and embracing green growth strategies. So again, ensuring that these landscapes continue to produce adequate livelihoods, which are dependent on forest. And then there are some districts that are far beyond understanding what sustainability means. So operating under these different jurisdictions make it even more complex. So again, how you mobilize different stakeholders to move in the same direction can be quite a barrier. And that's why within the 10 years of supporting companies implement sustainable supply chains, we still see a lot of room for improvement because of these issues that we continue to face.
Great, thanks. You know, we've had a couple questions coming in through chat, and I wanted to kind of synthesize one for both of you to reflect on. And that's, you know, given climate impacts are already starting to be felt in many regions of the world, including in the Aceh region, I'm just curious your reflections on how the work with value chains thinks about climate resilience down at the community level. If there's any approaches that you've been taking to really enhance resilience of small-scale farmers and producers, whether it's through access to climate and weather-related information or other approaches for managing around production losses or other climate impacts that may affect a community. Just curious if that's coming up in your work and how you're thinking about community resilience.
There, Tim, I'll jump in on that if I may.
Sure.
So thank you, Niha, I hope I'm saying that correctly, for the question. So I think when it comes to the community side, how we're considering climate resilience, it's a bit different from the companies themselves, who, of course, it's in their interest to make investments and ensure that these plantations, which are going to be around for decades, are climate resilient. As far as communities are concerned, we do have partnerships with local universities here to ensure that the crops we're testing in these demonstration plots with the communities are resistant to heat, drought, and things that are expected in a changing climate. So we've tested a number of those cultivars on the ground, and that's an important part of it. The second part related to the other question that came through in the chat is ensuring that the systems are diverse. So we're not just planting one or two things, we're actually using sort of a permaculture system, if I could use that term, where we're planting a whole host of different crops so that if a pest comes in, which we're seeing in climate change increasingly, a lot of pests, that they're unlikely to thrive in a diverse system like that as they would in a, for example, industrial monocrop of a single crop. So those are two things we're absolutely considering with the communities.
Great, thanks. I don't know, Molly or Fareza or Robin, any additional reflections on the climate resilience questions?
I guess I would just add,
sorry.
By protecting the forests and the peatlands that so many of these communities, they're frontier communities, so they're nearby, that also is an effort to help address the most strong impacts of climate change, because of course, even that local forest can provide cooler air, more water in the atmosphere. As Steve mentioned, the peat provides clean water. When those begin to be cleared, the communities suffer even greater impacts from climate change, in addition to the contributions of climate change that those are made. So I do think it's worth just noting that protecting those ecosystems is also a key aspect of the resilience that we're driving.
Great. Just want to encourage participants to chat in questions you have, and in a few minutes, we'll turn to opening it up to hear more from participants with questions or quick observations. I did want to ask a question, and starting with Molly, given that we've got a lot of the community involved in TCLP is working with development and climate finance institutions or country governments working on advancing climate action, sustainable development. I wanted to hear your thoughts on, or any words of wisdom based on your experience and the Hershey Company's experience about how development finance institutions and governments can work productively with companies to advance corporate sustainability agendas and transformation on the landscape that really gets at the heart of advancing sustainable development goals. So any thoughts on kind of that productive relationship between the private sector and other institutions?
Absolutely. I have three potential thoughts to consider, which is one, first and foremost, you all as the development finance institutions and governments really are conveners. You have access to a wide range of stakeholders, like technical experts, industry, civil society, et cetera, who all potentially have decision-making authority, buy-in from local populations, and access. And so really companies can benefit from this sort of engagement. And because at the end of the day, as I said earlier, it's really going to be tough for any company alone to tackle this. So as a convener, you have a lot of opportunity to pull us in. I would also say there's an opportunity around innovative supply chain and community-based solutions that I believe a lot of your organizations really have an opportunity to pilot, for example, such as like payment for ecosystem services. And then as those begin to scale, similar to what Robin had said with Earthworm's approach, is those really become really attractive opportunities to pull private sector in as we see what works. And then really, I would say the last part is just a call to action in terms of helping push for continued transparency throughout the supply chain, pushing for open source data, harmonization of methodologies and data. Just as Hershey as an end user, we're really pushing down our supply chain and asking for that so we can make sure we are targeting the right parts of our supply chain with the right actions and requests. So the more stakeholders doing that and asking for that, the louder the message. So those are my three pieces of food for thought.
Great. And let me just open it up for the rest of the folks from Earthworm Foundation. If there's any reflections you have or words of wisdom for ways that development finance institutions, climate finance institutions, and governments can be working productively with organizations like your own to advance some of the value chain transformation work that you're supporting.
I think what I've mentioned is that sustainability can be a cost for a lot of these small, medium enterprises. And what we see now these days, a lot of international financial institutions are producing, sustainable financing instruments. However, most of those products are only available for advanced economies or very large companies. So that access allows them to become more sustainable companies because they're incentivized. But when we look in Indonesia, the local market is not producing enough of these type of financial innovations that is quite critical to drive these more smaller companies to embrace sustainability, because there's so much that can be done through a stick approach that we need more carrots. And those carrots are not yet created in the local markets. So if we can drive more partnerships from multilateral development agencies as well as banks to partner with local banks and create that innovation, that would tremendously help these smaller companies to adopt more sustainable practices. But as well as incentivize governments to create the enabling environment so that these banks can innovate and create a level playing field for the suppliers to adopt more higher standards in sustainability.
Great. Thanks. What I'd like to do now is turn toward our participants here. We have a couple questions that have been coming in, and also wanted to create space for folks to share questions and brief observations as well, and see what reflections that you all have back on those. Let's see. I think let me first summarize. James White, I think, had a question around, have you tackled measuring biodiversity impacts, both positive and negative? But I've also seen some chat coming in around broader thinking about kind of ecosystem services and some of these range of different impacts. And just curious on reflections that you all have on how you've tackled measuring those types of things, if that's still something that's a work in progress, or if you have any insights about things that have worked well, and as you think about a multiple benefits frame, how you've tried to bring that type of information forward as part of your transparency goals. So anybody on the panel here like to take a run at that measurement, particularly around biodiversity, but more broadly as well?
Thanks, Tim. I'll jump in on that. Okay. So the region up there that we talked about, the Lucer ecosystem, of course, it's one of the most biodiverse places on the planet. So the things that we track most directly through the satellites is forest and land cover change. So there are other organizations that have whole hundreds of scientists that are looking at habitat areas, biodiversity. They've mapped that, they've created the layers. So by using our satellite surveillance with this information that the scientific communities put out there, we're able to identify when biodiversity hotspots are under threat in near real time. So by reporting out on the parameters of forest change and land cover change, that's how we on the Earthworm side are able to detect threats to biodiversity. Perhaps as a proxy, it's indirect, but very important nonetheless.
Great. Any other reflections you all have on the measurement aspects?
I'll just add to that a little bit, that one of the tools that we use in all of the landscapes that we're doing internationally is the high conservation value forest framework. So it has 6 different aspects to assessing high conservation value that include looking at rare and endangered species, rare and endangered ecosystems, ecosystems that are important for community livelihoods or that also hold cultural value. So we use that framework to assess key places that are biodiversity hotspots, as well as working with local conservation organizations like Steve mentioned, who are already doing that mapping. But in general, we do approach it from an ecosystem-wide standpoint, and our focus is on looking at land use change, but also prioritizing those areas with important conservation values.
Great. Let's see, we've got a question in from Scott on the line. I don't know, Scott, would you like to ask your question? I don't know.
Hi, can people hear me?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sorry. Thanks for the presentation, everybody. I was just curious, in some of the climate change work that I have supported with regards to fossil fuel and coal companies in India and Southeast Asia, there's often a balancing act between pressuring corporations, fossil fuel companies and such, through what we'd call an outer track, which would be like shame and blame, and then versus an inner track when you try to get in the same room with them and negotiate with them and try to find a win-win. And I was just wondering if you can speak a little bit with regards to if you find that balancing act in your work, or if you lean just more towards the negotiating inner track, or if there's any outer track as well.
Thanks for the question, Scott. I had just actually dropped a reply in there. So I think maybe perhaps quite famously, this dynamic, this balance of inner versus outer plays out with some well-known actors. So the similar to fossil fuel, we see the campaigning, the activist NGOs like Greenpeace, Rainforest Action Network. They've been quite successful at bringing industry actors to the negotiating table just by naming and shaming. Aggressively, so that consumers are pressuring the companies to change. That's useful, but not particularly solutions oriented. So I would say for our part, we're more firmly in the inner lane, as you call it, where we're trying to identify these practical solutions that can be carried out in the supply chain. So not really through a shaming approach, but more on the solutions side. But I will say, were it not for the activists and campaigning NGOs, I think far fewer companies would be on that list that Robin showed earlier on. So,
Molly, do you have any quick reflections on that question you'd like to add?
Fully agree with what you said. I think, we look to Earthworm for helping us really engage and create solutions within the transformation in our palm supply chain. But we also appreciate the activists who really do have to push us to the table and make sure we are knowing where we need to continue to make and push for progress.
Great. Just want to encourage people in the chat to not just ask questions, but share any observations you have about ways that you might take some of these ideas forward, or your own reflections from your own work that are relevant to this conversation. Let's see. Nasibe, I know that I wanted to create some space for you to come in and see if you have any reflections on some of the discussions so far, given all the work that you've been involved with the CIF and the Forest Investment Program. So Nasibe?
Thanks, Tim. Hi everyone. Good afternoon. Yeah, as Tim mentioned, I have some experience with the Forest Investment Program in Mexico. And I just want to follow up one comment from Faresa. He was talking about the relevance of partnerships with local banks and how local governments can create incentives to create these enable environments to generate investments in landscapes. And I just want to share very, very briefly a project from Mexico's investment plan. Basically, it was to generate financial inclusion from forest enterprises, community forest enterprises. And the way of doing that was to engage the private sector in Mexico through a local and they call themselves a social financial institution, sort of to generate the path to prove or to reduce the risk or the perceived risk from forest investments. And I just want to add that we will be talking a little bit more in depth about this case next October 1st, which is not next Thursday, but the one after this. And we will have one of members of this financial institution to talk about this. And also we're gonna have Gareth Phillips from the African Development Bank to talk about private sector in landscapes. So if you are interested, please drop us an email and we can add you to that conversation. Thank you, Tim.
Great, thanks, Nasibe. I'd like to turn to Neha Sharma from the Climate Investment Funds. Neha, you had a question there. I wondered if you could ask that for the panel.
Sorry, is that to me, because it's Neha Rai from IIED?
Okay, yes, it is. My apologies for that. I got the wrong Neha, but yeah, please ask your question.
No, I think this was a very interesting set of presentation. And one of the questions I've been juggling with, and while looking through various examples of companies that have started to look into climate resilient value chains, particularly, it's not always clear how companies have started thinking about their investments, considering future warming scenarios, or to plan under uncertainty based on future climate trends projections. A lot of things are being done in terms of current climate trends, but not on future projections, depending on how things will change. So in short, are companies planning for uncertainties, and are they ensuring that current actions are not maladaptive in the long run, even though they may be beneficial in the short run? So the crops they grow or the diversification they do, is it actually looking at long-term scenarios? Thanks.
Great. Anyone on our panel would like to take that one?
So I can start from Hershey perspective, though noting Neha was asking, I think, a bit also about perhaps the actual producers at origin. Just very broadly, I think many big private sector companies at least are very much taking into account what climate change may mean for their supply chain and the long-term sustainability. Hershey, for example, has committed to a science-based target. We plan to have our new greenhouse gas emission reduction target announced in the coming months, inclusive of scope 3 emissions. So we're very aware of that's not necessarily getting at what we're doing to invest in our supply chain yet, but it is something we are very aware of and looking at holistically. And of course, we'll create roadmaps and strategies that help make sure we are investing in the right things to continue to have a sustainable supply chain. So that's really more of an end user perspective, but just to give some thoughts.
Right. Anybody else like to follow?
I think what we've seen in Indonesia is that most companies have not yet thought through a science-based target on their current investments. And that is because the government hasn't been thinking about it, or there is no incentive yet to think about these issues yet. So again, for the situation in Indonesia, I think a lot of them are still concerned of sustainability within their supply chain, but have not yet made science-based targets for future scenarios. There are conversations now on reducing carbon emissions, and that has just started. That has just begun. So we will continue to see how corporates are, in Indonesia in particular, are engaging on this topic.
Great. We've got a few minutes left and some great questions coming in. I'd like to try and take two before we close. One is around, I'm going to synthesize a few questions here around this idea of ecosystem services, which I mentioned a few minutes ago, where there may be multiple forms of value, but you've got companies investing that may, they're focused on maybe not that full suite of value. So are there, any progress or thinking about ways to kind of monetize or to capture those other forms of value that producers and small scale farmers may be creating by responsible stewardship of the landscapes and how are you thinking about those kind of multiple ecosystem services that may be in play in a particular place or region? So anybody want to speak to that briefly on the panel?
I can try to take that one on. I think that many of for example, the cities in the US and Europe are quite advanced in thinking about issues like their water sourcing and the long-term sustainability of water. We haven't seen as much of that in many of the landscapes that we're working on, but our hope is that as we map these critical values and as we engage with local stakeholders, they will begin to think about the current value that those ecosystem services are bringing. One of the things we have been thinking about is just the opportunity cost that many companies and farmers experience when they decide to leave a forest standing, not clear land that they otherwise could be growing palm oil on, and how we can help to compensate them, maybe not for the complete opportunity lost, but at least for the cost of actively protecting that forest that they've decided not to clear. And so one of the things we're experimenting right now is what we call the Forest Conservation Fund. This is a fund that we're inviting companies who have a forest footprint to invest in, and then we use the funds, we give those back to local communities who have forest areas that they've decided not to clear, that they want to keep standing, but they need funds to make sure that those areas are not cleared by anyone else as well. So we've set up a forest conservation fund that companies can pay into, and then local communities can get some funding to help them maintain those forests. And that's also true of companies who have a large part of their concession area now as forests that they're committed to protect. So that's one way that we're looking to compensate for part of that.
Great. Before I move to the final question, I did want to see, there was a question that Ben Murphy raised about trust that was mentioned. And Steve, I think you brought that up in your presentation. I'm just curious if there's any quick reflections you have on kind of strategies for maintaining and building trust. And then we'll turn to the last question and wrap up for today.
I think one of the most important things is respecting the commercial sensitivity of the information at play. So if the companies didn't feel confident that we would, respect their supply chain information, not share sensitive commercial information with either their competitors or other stakeholders who would love to have that information, we wouldn't be able to work with them. So, we do a lot in terms of the internal system security and the tools that we deploy with these companies so that they're quite confident, very confident, in fact, to share information that they might not put out in the public domain. So I think that's certainly part of it. Robin, I don't know if you have any comments more on the relationship management side, but I think that's a practical element I would speak to, honoring commercial data sensitivities.
Great. I think with the last question, I'd love to just get really brief words from our panelists about what makes you really optimistic and excited about the potential for transformation in your landscapes work over the coming years. Leave us with a little bit of inspiration. And so, Molly, would you be willing to kick us off on that?
Sure. I think what gets me most excited is the fact that companies really are making big commitments, and we know that there is so much need to make sure we're doing these kind of investments within our supply chain. And so having partners out there like Earthworm, the different development banks, who are really good, as I said, conveners, leaders, bringing us to the table and helping us make sure we're impacting the supply chain in the positive way, is what makes me most excited. So please keep it coming. We need you.
Great. Fareza, any quick thoughts on what you're excited and optimistic about?
I think I'm excited about the other commodities coming into this shared responsibility. So the narrative is growing much stronger for these other commodities to play a role in these landscapes. And these are commodities that may be, just benzoin or plant oils that have an impact in those landscapes, and wanting to understand how they can contribute to protect these areas. So again, as we go through this process, it's no longer a palm oil problem, but it's actually everyone's problem to solve together, as Molly had mentioned.
Great. And Steve or Robin, any real quick reflections you have?
I'm excited by just how companies are increasingly getting comfortable with owning those values and talking to their suppliers about the values. I'd say early on in the journey, those were often, awkward, uncomfortable conversations that that companies were unsure about how to go about talking with their suppliers about. And I've seen, as companies have recruited sustainability experts, really dug into understanding the issues. It's been great to see the investor community really begin to own those values as well. The recent announcements by BlackRock and others, I think, are all changing the environment from one where companies used to only talk about sort of price, quantity, delivery, to ones where they're increasingly comfortable talking about these environmental and social issues. So that's the thing that gives me hope.
And I apologize, we're going to need to move to wrap right now in the interest of protecting people's time, but I'd like to just a very hearty thank you to all of our panelists, Molly, for joining us from the Hershey Company, and for the whole team at Earthworm Foundation. Thank you. This has been a really rich conversation. I'd like to turn briefly to Regan Smurthwaite with the CIF to briefly reference some of the information up on the screen right now about upcoming events.
Thanks, Tim. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. Thank you to our excellent speakers and panelists. We wanted to let you know about some upcoming events for the Transformational Change Learning Partnership interest groups. As Nasibe said earlier, we have an upcoming webinar for landscapes on the 1st of October. We also have additional interest group meetings on the 15th of October for the Transformational Change Concepts, Methods, and Metrics group, and a webinar on the 22nd of October with our Clean Energy interest group. If you are interested in joining any of the 4 interest groups, please let me know. You can find more information about these interest groups at the TCLP webpage, which is linked below. I would now like to hand it over to Anna to talk about other ways to get involved and stay informed.
Thank you, Regan. Thank you also to Tim for facilitating this, and the Earthworm Foundation staff, and of course Molly for participating today. I think we've actually touched upon so many aspects of transformational change, from satellites to the role of NGOs that create peer pressure, to trust and respect, and maps being drivers for this as well. So I'd just like to acknowledge that the multiple entry points and what Earthworm has learned by doing, including the necessity to learn by doing and adapt as you go along, is all part of this longer transformative change journey that this work embodies. I think I'll leave it at that today, with gratitude for all of you who've engaged and contributed. We do have not only the upcoming events that Regan just described, but we have other opportunities to either share resources or stories or studies that relate to transformational change and climate action. or other types of exchanges that we would like to continue having with this broader community. So on behalf of the Transformational Change Learning Partnership, I'll also just say thank you and recognize that these are tough times. 2020 is an exceptionally complicated and challenging year that is driving transformation in all different directions. So learning by doing every day. That's what we're all in this journey for and experiencing. So thank you again. It's really a pleasure to hear about this work, and we'll continue the conversations with you as we can. Thank you. Have a good day, evening, and
thank you.
And everybody take care.
Thanks, everyone.